fellow communicators, and welcome guests. I'm going to try not to be too cumbrous tonight when I speak, but I would like to talk about a literary tool, and it's called the use of irony. Irony is like coincidence, but it's a little bit different. Irony, I'll give you an example of irony. My aunt and uncle came to visit us when I was a kid, and they were sitting there, my parents and my aunt and uncle were sitting there drinking coffee. And someone mentioned dessert, and Dad said, well, I think there's something in the freezer. So he went to the freezer, got out some fruitcake, and he cut it in thin slices and started serving it to his guests. After a while, my uncle said, I feel terrible. I've eaten up all the fruitcake. And my dad said, oh, don't worry about it. I don't like it anyhow. So what do you think my uncle got my dad for the next 10 years in a row for Christmas? It's fruitcake. That was irony. Irony has a human element to it. Coincidence, we consider it to be more of divine providence. Someone has said that coincidence is when God does something and chooses to remain anonymous. I was working on my book, and the chapter was called Indiana Flying Squadron. And there were three things I knew about the setting. One thing I knew was that the county where the setting took place, the western border is also the Indiana-Illinois border. Three things I discovered doing my research was that the first World War I flying certified flyer was from that same county, and it's the second least populated county in the whole state. It's an agricultural county. I also found out that this county had what was called a local option prohibition. The whole state had local option prohibition, which meant counties could choose whether they would serve alcoholic beverages or not, and this county, of course being a rural county, chose not to. It also happened that the governor of the state that signed that law into practice was from that county. The third thing I found in my research was that 9/11, September 11th, 2001, was not the first time the United States was invaded by outside terrorists. The first incident occurred in 1916, and Pancho Villa on March 9th came across the border to New Mexico and invaded Columbia, New Mexico, which also had a military base. 17 people died in that event. So the third element, well then Woodrow Wilson, the president, sent a flying squadron to chase Pancho Villa around the country. So we were developing our aero squadron because the Wright brothers had discovered the plane, but America dropped the ball with using the plane for a military device. We still thought of the plane for reconnaissance and finding out information. So the punitive expedition was where they went to chase Pancho Villa around New Mexico and then around Mexico, and they used it to develop our aero squadron. And the flyers in World War I, the only way to get into the war was through France or through Canada. So we didn't even send flyers to the war from our own resources. I had a chapter that I was working on, and I took these three elements. One of my characters was going across to Illinois, buying some products that were illegal in Indiana, bringing them back and selling them in a dry county. He figured it was a victimless crime because he was only providing a commodity that would otherwise be more expensive. He could provide it cheaper, avoid taxes. So he gets caught. In his plea bargain, he gets assigned to the aero squadron because there was a member of the aero squadron from that county. They needed someone. He was a photographer and a newsman. They needed someone to do publicity because they wanted America to see how great our flying capabilities were becoming. So he gets assigned to the flying squadron as a plea bargain, and so that was all I had for that chapter. Then I was looking at antiques with a friend one time. He liked to look at vinyl or 33 1/3 records in the basement of this antique shop. I went up to the main floor where they had the big furniture, and I looked through there and didn't find anything. Then I went up to the third floor where they had books everywhere. They were scattered everywhere in laying over each other. The binding was beginning to darken, and you couldn't even tell what the books were. The room was dark and dusty. So I looked around, and as soon as I started looking at the books, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I said, I'm going to find something significant today. So I stopped, and I saw Flying Squadron. So I said, that's what I'm researching right now, so I'll see what the book is. I opened the book, and this book was written in 1914 by Frank Hanley, the man that was governor of Indiana that signed the bill allowing prohibition in Indiana. He had developed a group of speakers that were visiting every major town in the United States and every state capital, giving speeches on prohibition, and he was also testing the water to become the 1916 prohibition candidate for president. So the irony of the story was that I already had the Indiana Flying Squadron as my title, but then through research and through a find or a coincidence, I changed my chapter to from Indiana Flying Squadron to Hoosier Flying Squadrons when I found out that there were two flying squadrons from Indiana that had the same purpose.